For political media in and around Boston, including those of us here at GBH News, the big story this fall has been Boston's historic mayoral race. Whoever wins when the votes are counted next week, the city is about to elect its first ever female mayor, and either its first Asian American mayor or its first Arab American mayor. But Boston is not the only city facing a momentous election. There are a bevy of hotly contested mayoral races underway across Massachusetts. Some feature embattled incumbents like Framingham Mayor Yvonne Spicer, who got beat 2-1 by challenger Charlie Kashinsky in September's preliminary election. In other cities, incumbents have stepped away voluntarily after governing through an unprecedented pandemic. Case in point, Somerville, where Tatiana Ballantyne and Wilton Baugh are vying to replace Joe Curtatone after 9 terms. Obviously, these and other races are incredibly important to the people who live in those communities, but they might also give those of us who don't a window into bigger shifts in storylines shaping Massachusetts politics as a whole. Joining me to talk about the notable contests outside of Boston are Lisa Kashinsky, the author of Politico's Massachusetts Playbook, and Wilnelia Rivera, the founder of Rivera Consulting and former chief strategist for Congresswoman Ayanna Pressley's campaign. Good to have both of you here. Lisa, let me start with you. We were talking earlier today, and you said you see some parallels between two campaigns where incumbents are on the hot seat. Framingham, which I mentioned a moment ago, and Gloucester, which I didn't. What are the through lines that those two races share to your eye?
Absolutely. So yeah, I will mention that every mayor's race is a little bit different, local issues and all that, but these definitely do have some similarities. So to start with, you have two mayors who have took some heat during COVID, as everyone did, but they also bring some other baggage with them to their re-election fights. In Framingham, incumbent Yvonne Spicer has made headlines for clashing with members of her city council during her first term. And in Gloucester, you have an incumbent mayor who recently has faced complaints lodged against her and the city. She's faced a lawsuit, she's faced resignations, and the Gloucester Daily Times reported over the summer that she had even been found through an investigation to have violated the city's code of conduct. So that makes these mayors targets in some ways that other mayors might not be. And you also now have a super PAC backed by Governor Charlie Baker, who's wading into some of these races against them.
It's been really interesting to watch how Mayor Spicer is trying to, I think I can say, spin the involvement of Charlie Baker's super PAC. She asserted, and I think I learned this from either a tweet that you sent or maybe from Playbook, she said that basically the Republicans are looking to get me out of office. My opponent, Charlie Kashinsky, is part of a Republican-led push to do this. She pointed out that that PAC, as she described it, had supported a local politician in Framingham who was pro-Donald Trump. Of course, Mayor Spicer also has been opposed by a couple of Framingham state reps who are Democrats. Do you think that that's an effective line of attack for her as she tries to rile up her supporters and turn things around from the prelim?
I think it's definitely something that can be motivating and has been in past elections, obviously coming off the 2020 election. But again, these races are hyper-local, and the person that she's facing, Charlie Kashinsky, is a longtime city official, had been on the city council, is very well known in town, and has a lot of backers behind him, as you noted.
I should mention, and then we'll get you in here, Wilnelia, that Mayor Spicer was the first Black woman to win a citywide mayoral election in the history of Massachusetts. I think she's still the only one, and she may be gone after one term. Wilnelia Rivera, I know that you are interested in a whole bunch of races, as Lisa is, of course, but you suggested to me that we talk about a couple up north of Boston, in Lawrence and Lowell. Let's start off with Lawrence. For selfish reasons, I just know a little more about Lawrence politics than Lowell politics. What's intriguing about that contest?
Well, what's intriguing about the context in Lawrence is that it was an open field because former Mayor Danny Rivera decided to shorten his term and go on to work for the state. And what could have been, and what was a very for us, it's an intergenerational race. And I say us because I'm very biased. I actually grew up in Lawrence, so part of the reason why I want to make it a focus is that it's a community that's really gone through a lot of changes in the last 10 years, and this mayoral election is really a test of the young generation that stayed and chose to build their city and Kendris Vasquez, who's most likely to be elected mayor in the city, is really coming in with a change focus that's very different than what we've seen in the past. And I think for a lot of the younger generations of Laurentians that are there, he's really done an amazing job at crisscrossing the city in a way that's really makes the city look like what it should be, which is it's a multiracial community. And I'm just really excited to see what Kendris is gonna do. He's already done a pretty amazing job as an acting mayor, but more importantly, has brought in people into the process that usually haven't been involved in local politics and in the city of Lawrence. So for someone like me, I'm just really looking forward to what his administration can bring to the city, and in terms of just not just new investments, but really more ownership in the future of what the direction of the city looks like.
Tell me if I'm right here, just from covering a couple of Lawrence mayoral campaigns. My sense is that, go back a decade, maybe, give or take, Lawrence was sort of a punching bag for people who paid attention to Massachusetts politics, because we had an incumbent back in the day who had a lot of scandals attached to his name. I remember Mayor Rivera.
Former Mayor Lantigua, how could we forget?
I remember Mayor Rivera campaigning against Mayor Lantigua and following him around as he was door knocking. And his pitch at the time was, we can't get people to come in and invest in Lawrence if everyone's laughing at us and if everyone thinks we're a poster child for dysfunction. My sense is that Mayor Rivera, while people may take issues with individual decisions he made, that he helped start this shift. I don't want to use the wrong word here, but getting people to not snicker when they talked about Lawrence politics again. Is
Absolutely.
It fair to see this election as the culmination of that?
Absolutely a culmination of it, right? And not just that, but he brought Laurentians into city government in a way that you never saw before. Again, making sure that people that grew up in the city also had a stake in leading the city. And now with Kendris, who's a former city councilor and also acting mayor, someone that was there from the very beginning. Kendris was, a door knocker on Mayor Dan's first campaign, and now he's about to become the next mayor of the city of Lawrence. So again, it's definitely something. It's a culminating point, but definitely a lot more work to do in the city of Lawrence in particular. But I think that the city has a lot to be proud of next week.
Give me a quick rundown on what people should be watching in Lowell, why that's interesting, and then Lisa, I got to ask you about Somerville, which we both covered a little bit.
Yeah, and what's interesting about Lowell, it's actually not the mayoral election, believe it or not. So what's happening in Lowell is that, for years, community organizations actually fought to go from a completely at-large city council to now actually ward-based city council. And what I'm really focused on and looking on in that race is the campaign of Corey Robinson, who might become who's most likely to become the first Black city councilor in the city of Lowell. But what's galvanizing about his race is that he's doing it in a way that's bringing together all of the constituencies across the city. But most importantly, it really shows you the importance of getting into these long-term fights that sometimes feel pretty elusive and that you can't really do anything about it, right? I mean, when you think about Boston and whether they can elect a school committee, that feels like a very far-fetched thing, but it's on the ballot now, right?
Yep.
So for me in Lowell, what I'm looking at is, can the people of Lowell take advantage of the new city council districts in a way that creates more inclusive representation for the Cambodian community and the African American community there?
And there was a court case attached, right, to that? Some
Yes,
litigation, if I recall correctly.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, litigation and organizing. A little bit of both.
All right, Lisa, let's talk Somerville, which I covered back before the prelim. You're probably more up to date on it than I am, but we've got two finalists, Wilnelia and Katiana Ballantyne. To my eye, this is sort of a microcosm in where the Democratic Party is right now, between people who are center left and a little further to the left. Am I oversimplifying there?
No, I think that's pretty much where Somerville finds itself right now, because you have two mayoral candidates who are both progressives, who finished really close together in the preliminary election. So that's kind of a toss-up. But then you look at the city council races, where you have what could be, if all seven of them get elected, a Democratic Socialist takeover of the city council, is kind of how it's been termed by myself and my Playbook predecessor. So that's really fascinating to see right now, because Somerville, has been that progressive fashion and now is kind of poised to potentially take that next step.
I bet and I don't know if he's a viewer, I bet if Mayor Curtatone is watching, he'll say, wait a minute, what do you mean we're not a progressive bastion? Look at all the areas where I pushed Marty Walsh when he was mayor and I was out in front. Look at how I hung a Black Lives Matter flag on City Hall. But your point is well taken. I don't think it's what people usually think of when they think of Somerville. What would it mean if the council is controlled by Democratic Socialists?
I think it would potentially be the only majority Democratic Socialist city council in the country, for what I've been able to see. So I think it, again, it marks that next chapter, that next march forward, and maybe a little bit to the left even more for Somerville. And it seems like a little bit that this might be where the Democratic Party as a whole might be heading. I think Wilnelia might be able to chime in on that too.
I'm imagining, by the way, Fox News coverage of a completely socialist city council right there in Massachusetts. Wilnelia, do you think that this is a sign of a shift among Democrats, broadly speaking?
I mean, it's a sign of Somerville's ongoing evolution, is what I would say.
Nicely put.
I wouldn't read too much into that.
All right.
Moderates are still in power in Massachusetts, so.
A couple more races that you wanted to talk about out to the west, which actually exists, even though a lot of us forget that it does, in Worcester and Central Mass, and also Springfield. What is interesting there?
Yeah. Again, I think what's interesting, similar to Lowell, but not in the sense of litigation that led to what's happening in both Springfield and Worcester. But I think what's exciting about what we're seeing in both these places, and again, I'm looking at the city council races in these places, is the people of color that are running viable campaigns and on the verge of getting on the city council, right? And the reason why these stories are so critical and so important to the shifts locally in places like Worcester and places like Springfield is that they represent, again, the younger generation, and also new immigrant communities that have come into these communities as well. And I think that more importantly, it also shows the potential of what could happen in places like Worcester and Springfield if we actually paid more attention, right? So, for instance, in Springfield, we have three candidates that I've been paying attention to in District 3, 4, and 8. African American, Black, and also white progressive, right? In a city that, let's be honest, it's pretty conservative Democrat. So I want to be clear.
Mayor Sarno, yep.
Yeah, Mayor Sarno, pretty conservative Democrat, right? But I think what we're seeing is, again, we're seeing a younger, more left generation that's coming together in a multiracial fashion to try to organize against a more conservative sort of power block that exists in other parts of the state, right? So that's what I find really exciting in Springfield. And in Worcester is something similar with, I'm going to say the District 5 candidate. I don't want to mispronounce her name, but she's a first-time candidate who has pretty much surprised everyone in District 5 and beat out everybody beat out everyone in a 4-way preliminary, and now is poised to become the first people from, I forget what her background is right now, but I'll come back to this later. But I think what's exciting about, again, in Worcester, similar to Springfield, is that we're seeing people that have run multiple times that are now poised to win in places that, again, are really, really difficult to win. For people in Boston, it might seem like, well, all you have to do is just run a few times and then you can win. Places like, Worcester, Springfield, or Lowell, people aren't spending a lot of money in these places, right? So these kinds of victories in many ways also mean more because they're much more community driven. And I think it's, just an important factor for us to be paying attention to what the potential we can have in the state if we paid a little bit more attention to these other cities.
I will take that point to heart. I appreciate it. Wilnelia Rivera and Lisa Kashinsky. Good to talk to both of you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.